You're listening to Aviation Marketing Hangar Flying, the community for the best sales and marketing professionals in the aviation industry. You can't learn to fly just from a book. You learn from other pilots who know the tools, the skills, and the territory. Your hosts, John and Paula Williams, are your sales and marketing test pilots. They take the risks for you and share strategies, relevant examples, hacks, and how-tos. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes so you won't miss a thing.
Welcome to this month's book club discussion. Today we are talking about Brain Surfing, the Top Marketing Strategy Minds in the World by Heather LeFevre. So I'm Paula Williams.
And I'm John Williams.
And we are ABCI, and ABCI's mission is
to help all you ladies and gentlemen out there in the aviation world sell more products and services.
Absolutely. So every month we read a different sales or marketing book, and this one was suggested by somebody in our group. I have no idea who. And honestly, I was kind of skeptical of this one, if only because of the cover and the title. I thought that was kind of a little bit of a turnoff for me, because I was thinking this is going to be kind of a pop psychology. I don't know, the pink and orange brain on the cover just didn't really do it for me. What do you think? But it was actually really kind of interesting, because the premise of the book, I mean, this turned out to be kind of a marketing book plus a travelogue, both of which we love travel and we love marketing. So it turned out to be much better than I'd expected. So the theory behind the book, Heather LeFevre, she's an American that has been working in Amsterdam for a while, and she was feeling kind of burnt out, and being a creative person that's feeling kind of burnt out is death, right?
I don't know. She presents a lot of this as all brand new, let's go get them stuff, and some of it's so old that, I experienced a lot of this stuff growing up, so yeah. I'm not sure why.
Well, speaking of old, in the days before universities, a person learned a trade by being an apprentice for 7 years, and then being a journeyman and traveling to study with various different masters, or people who are really the best in their trade, and learning different methods for another 7 years. And then they could call themselves a master goldsmith or cobbler or whatever the profession or the guild or the trade was, right?
Yeah, but you know what? In the days after universities, using myself as an example, I did the same thing. My dad told me, he said, and he didn't say it like that, but what he told me was to go out there and learn from each company for a couple of years, change companies, and continue to do that, using each one as a stepping stone to the next level.
Right.
And I did that for 7 years.
Right.
And then I became a consultant.
So you got a master's degree in life.
Oh, well, according to her.
Exactly. So another thing that she mentions is Stefan Sagmeister's TED Talk, where he takes a 1-year sabbatical every 7 years. And I think rather than taking a bunch of years at retirement, it makes some sense to do something different every 7 years or so, and to really kind of fuel the whole creativity by learning something different or trying something new and not doing the same thing over and over again. You and I both feel the same way about universities, I think. They teach you some interesting stuff, but some of it's not really relevant to the real world, right?
It's hopefully educating your brain, but not necessarily relevant to any particular vocation or avocation you want to chase.
Exactly.
If it is, so much the better, but I think corporate America has used that as a discriminator rather than...
Yeah, that's true. And that's fair. So, the theory behind the book, Brain Surfing, it's not, using psychotropic drugs or, anything like that, is on the same theory as couch surfing. So basically she becomes a guest in the home of each of these great marketers, and she gets to snoop around, what books are they reading? What do they talk about around the kitchen table? How many hours do they put in at work? How do they run meetings? Who are the most important people in their company? Who do they spend the most time with? All of those kinds of things that we wouldn't think to ask unless you're kind of embedded in a situation, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, as far back as third grade, my teacher said that when you grow up, when you are looking for a job, one of the things you're going to ask you is, what books have you read?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, he said it almost like that. What books have you read? And then they were going to go in and talk about these different books. They want to find out where your brain is. Do they do that in reality? They did for a while as I was growing up, but they don't anymore.
I was
Rarely
say,
do.
I don't think I've ever been asked, in a job interview or on a date or anything else, what books have you read, but I ask our kid that all the time, but that's, anyway. So her thought for this was to, make a top 10 list, just like we do, of, the people that she really wanted to learn from and send them letters. And she said, weirdly, some of them said yes, and not reluctantly. They really liked the idea. They liked her experiment. They liked the idea of the book, and they really got into it. So anyway, that's the theory behind the book. So it's a little unconventional, and it took me a while to kind of get the hang of the book, just because it's not a normal marketing book or a normal even fiction book, but it's kind of a mix of both.
I found it was kind of interesting here and there. It had some good thoughts, but as far as applying it to marketing, maybe to to the old style Madison Avenue firms, you might apply it, but I'm not sure you could apply it across the border to the way marketing is accomplished these days.
Okay. Well, I found a lot of really cool stuff in the book, so I'm sure we will agree to disagree here a lot.
Nah. Heaven forbid.
Okay, so the first person she talked with was Jason Oki in Hong Kong, Young and Rubicam. One thing I did notice about this, and I've noticed this before, but it really struck me when reading the book, all of the Madison Avenue type or all of the really cool marketing firms have terrible names that you would never remember. It's like two guys' last names with a plus sign sometimes or a bunch of initials or whatever. But anyway, so Jason Oki of Young and Rubicam in Hong Kong. So this is Jason at the Red Fuse conference, and really cool guy, actually. This is when I started actually becoming a little bit more, warmed up to the book, was listening to some of their conversations about different things, like the Checklist Manifesto is one of Jason's favorite books. And the Checklist Manifesto, of course, was written by a doctor. He was a surgeon who was kind of disgusted at the number of bad outcomes he was seeing in intensive care and in emergency rooms. And he applied a principle from aviation, of course, to the medical profession. And he got some really amazing results by just using a checklist. And so Jason put together, a checklist, several checklists actually of his own. He shares one in the book. But applying a checklist to a creative process, I think, is a really interesting idea. And I think that's...
So you think surgery is creative?
I think sometimes they do have to think outside the box, because they get complex injuries where more than one thing is injured.
I hear you.
And they can't just do a textbook thing. They have to think of ways to make this work, Yeah,
but they also have standardized procedures.
That's
by
true.
and large.
Yeah, exactly. And in marketing, we've got a lot of standardized procedures. If you want to solve X problem, are several ways of doing that, but there's lots of things you need to do to make sure your details are covered, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. No open wounds left unstitched.
No sponges left inside.
No sponges left in patients. That's true. So, there are some similarities there. Another thing that I really liked was their conversation about the tale of two robots. NASA wanted to explore the moon, and this was, several years ago. So the robot that NASA came up with was the size of a truck. And it had all of these things, and it was able to do a lot of processing and a lot of samples and things, and a lot of photography and a lot of different things.
It's going to take 3 Mars missions to get it off the ground.
Exactly. So, it was super expensive, super complicated, very, very large, very, very expensive. And Colin, the intern, who was, just an intern at NASA, went to Radio Shack and spent a couple $100 and bought a little remote controlled car, stuck a couple of things together, put a camera on it, put some way for it to communicate and things like that, and suggested that they not have it do everything that they wanted it to do. Why can't we do most of that stuff on Earth? And all we really need it to do is take pictures and
be a probe,
be a sensor. All it needs to do is be sensors. It doesn't need to be a processor. So I love that approach, that they talked about. How can you come up with low-cost, playful ideas that will beat big, heavy, corporate, stupid ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I really like that. And I think that was another really interesting conversation that they had.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of neat listening in on these conversations, don't you think?
Well.
Right. And we've noticed that too. When we're traveling and we get talking to people, they tell us stuff that, people just don't talk about in real life, but when you're a guest in someone's home or when you're a guest in someone's country, we've gotten into some really interesting conversations with people in the Louvre. Remember that? With that couple from Eastern Europe?
Yeah, and in Pakistan with respect to various topics.
So, I do understand that this is, a great way to get very quickly and deeply into somebody's thoughts, if you're actually staying with them. So Jason Oakey's 50 Ways to Get Started. My favorite one was this one. You define the business problem or the opportunity, and then you decide what audience can solve this. That's an interesting way of looking at it instead of how do I sell this?
When I was working in RTP for our IBM, that's exactly what my job was. I was the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Their developers had come to us with the essence of a product and said, how can we sell this?
Mm-hmm.
What are we at? And that was my job, and Mike, the guy who worked with me, that was what we had to do, was to scratch our heads and say, well, give us this, give us that, give us the other thing, and then leave us alone for a week. And then we would go work through it and try to find out some way to hook it all together and make it work so I could sell it.
Exactly.
And we ended up with a couple of really nice products for IBM that they sold.
Exactly. And you look at this from the perspective of an aviation product or service, the person that can solve the problem might not be the people that buy the product. It might be, that the FAA needs to create a rule saying that it's okay for people to do it this way. Or flight instructors might need to start teaching, the way they do weather differently, those kinds of things to make things better. So, what audience can change. That's the next step, is what experience does the audience need in order to change their behavior? What do you need to do to convince them? And it's not, I like the way they phrase this. What experience do they need to have? Not what data do they need to make a different decision? What experience do they need to have to change their behavior?
And what we did to continue.
Yeah.
When in one particular instance, we ended up with a very complex, but at this point, a product that there wasn't one in the IT game. And Mike and I took it to a couple of IBM clients and basically implemented in a test mode in their situation. But what we did differently was we didn't just put it up for test behavior. We actually used real live data from them into the product. So, what our essence was, we would do this, and then our intent was to get the CEO of these companies and the CFO and the president and those guys in and say, and whoever else wanted to be in there, and give them a business presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did, and in each of two cases, about midway through the presentation, the screen, all the icons started flashing and everything, and the guys would chuckle and say, well, it looks like your
software doesn't work.
Your software doesn't work. And I looked at Mike and I looked up and I said, excuse me, sir, but this is live data, and you just had what I'm going to assume, because I don't know how you're laid out outside here, but you've got a physical line that's been cut, probably a fiber cut by somebody digging outside. And he says, no. And I said, yes, actually it is. And they had a techie in the room and says, do you know about this? And the guy said, no. And he called his guy, said, and his first reaction was, no, there is no. And he said, wait a minute. Yeah, they're just now just confirming what this software told us 5 minutes ago. Mm-hmm. And that's the whole point. And the CEO looked at everybody in the room and he said, sold. He said, I'll talk to you later. And he left the room. And we looked at each other.
You need to get out of here because we got problems to solve.
That's right.
Right. So that was an experience they needed to have.
That's
and
an
they
experience
changed
they
their
needed to have.
behavior based on that. You weren't just presenting data. You actually made them have a visceral experience and grabbed their socks and say, you know what? The software actually notified us before anybody else did.
And what that did was we did it twice, that with two different completely separate clients in geographically disparate locations. Mm-hmm. And then subsequent to that, anytime we wanted to implement another one of these products, these clients had heard what Mike and I did, and they didn't want anybody else. They wanted us to go do it.
Right, exactly. You couldn't have planned that better. I mean, I guess
we didn't plan it.
Hire somebody to go do a fiber cut while your sales presentation is going on. But there are things you can control, and some things that you just take as opportunities, and that was a good one.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Okay, and then how can the brand's actions facilitate or create that experience, short of hiring somebody to go cut the fiber?
Well, I mean, typically we were hoping that maybe you'd have one or two small icons that were outages that they could verify.
Yeah, and there always is something.
We really didn't expect what happened. So if you want to call that luck, whatever.
Right. But I think this is a great way to look at marketing. Define the business problem or the opportunity. What audience can solve it? What experience does that audience need to have in order to change their behavior? And then how can the brand's actions facilitate that experience? This is different than the way people usually think about it, because they usually think, well, people, if they knew all this data, they would buy my product, right? It goes deeper than that. Uh-huh. So it's especially with something where you want somebody to change their behavior. Most people underestimate the amount of effort it takes to overcome inertia, especially nowadays, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So Simon Kemp in Singapore with We Are Social. Really like this guy also. I think he was a lot of fun. He has clients that come to him and say, we need a Facebook page with 1 million fans by next week. And his response is, really? Why? What are you trying to accomplish? And we go back to, that chart of Jason Oakley's, what is the business problem? What experience do we need to facilitate? And so on. I also liked Simon's idea about social structures, basically. You cannot create a social structure yourself. If you say, I grew this network from this to that, that's BS, quite frankly. It's an organic structure, right? So, just like you can't really say, I grew this potato.
No, you planted a seed, you watered it, you gave it whatever. Mm-hmm.
You provided an environment as good as you can, but there is still some element of chance in terms of what direction is it going to grow? What color is it going to be? Is it going to, my grandpa and I used to grow potatoes. He had a big garden, and, that was one of the things I used to do when I was a little kid, is help him in the garden. And we grew potatoes that looked like every U.S. president up to a certain point. Potatoes don't always look like this. And whenever you're trying to do something that involves other people, you don't have total control of it.
No joke.
Yeah, this is a great way, I think, to explain this to a client, or that he uses to explain to his clients. We don't just magically snap our fingers and create a network. If you do that, it's fake, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of fakeness on social media. But if you want something real, it could be ugly. Because it will be organic, and you have to be willing and able and prepared for any eventuality, either that the potato grows into the face of Abraham Lincoln, or that the potato grows really big, or that the potato stays small. There's lots of things that can happen that are outside of your control.
And you can't watch it 24 hours a day, so you don't know what happens at night. An animal
Exactly.
will come along, dig it up.
Yeah.
Or worse.
Right. That's true. So, you can practice good gardening, but you cannot control, there's a certain amount of control that you have and a certain amount of control that you do not have. Two other ideas that I really liked of Simon's were the theory of one-night stand marketing, which is what most people are doing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Meaning that you're after a single transaction rather than after a relationship. And it's obvious and it's creepy and it's gross. And that's why a lot of people don't like salespeople and they don't like marketing people. Is because they're after a one-night stand. But, if you turn that around and say, if I'm after a relationship, and in aviation, we have a small group of target customers. So almost all the time we have to be in it for the relationship, not for the transaction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that is an excellent resource in the book. And also the broccoli story. He is doing something with music, where he's creating music on his own. And this is a side project of his, that he's using to do marketing experiments and things like that. But as it turns out, he ends up being friends with a broccoli farmer in Tunisia,
Mm-hmm.
and, they end up talking music. So do you exclude, and this is a thing that we run into all the time with our customers, I am looking for customers that look like this, right? Okay, well, that's fine, but are you going to exclude a broccoli farmer from Tunisia who actually does want to buy your product? If he's got the means, the money, the authority, and the need.
His money's green.
Exactly.
Or blue, depending if it's euros, but
exactly. Or he may have a partnership idea, or he may contribute to your network in some way, or he may introduce you to somebody who's going to turn your life around. So, you have to be open to the broccoli farmers from Tunisia that will show up in your network and not just ignore them or be rude to them or anything else, right?
Yeah. What was that guy's name? The Power of Intention, who said that people are like streetcars. They come in and out of your life when they're supposed to.
When they're supposed to, not when you think they should. That's right. Dr. Wayne Dyer.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Power of Intention, also a good book. Okay. So Ruben Golston. I did not typo that name.
I know.
This is personal branding to start with. I think that's really interesting. Everybody was mispronouncing his name. So he changed the spelling and the capitalization to make it obvious that it's Ruben, not Robin. And anyway, and he's in Beijing. It's probably...
Well, you could think it was Robin if you got to capitalize like that. So.
Whatever. Yeah, exactly. Maybe it has something to do with Beijing. Maybe they do things differently there. But anyway, DMG Global, they do a lot of movies, music, things like that. So he's probably the cool kid of the group, right?
One of them.
One of them, exactly. So one thing that I did not know is that in China, they allow, up until 2012 anyway, they only allowed 20 foreign films to be screened in China. And China is a huge market. So everybody wants all of those screens and all of those eyeballs, especially if they've got a series like Marvel or Transformers or something like that.
Matter of fact, that was discussed in a journal here a couple of weeks ago.
Was it?
Yep.
What did they say?
People scramble like crazy to corner the market for those 20 films.
Yes, they do. Or you can do what he does, and that is to step outside that 20 by having it filmed in China.
That's right. And that was exactly what they said in the journal article.
Right. So there's another quote in this book that, about you get famous because of the rules you break. But his take on that was, how can you comply with the rules in a way that they're not expecting you to? So like for the Transformers movie, part of that was filmed in China. The movie Looper was filmed in China.
But in order to do that, though, one of the leading characters has got to be Chinese.
Yeah, there's a bunch of rules that you have to comply with.
A lot of rules that you have to comply with.
But sometimes it's worth it.
Yep.
So anyway, this is how to be a rebellious rule follower, which sometimes is a very cool thing. Jay-Z, he talks about Jay-Z as one of his... I'm not sure if he does marketing for Jay-Z. I didn't really get to the bottom of that from the book. But the things that he admires about Jay-Z is that he is an outstanding businessman as well as a musician. And, if you're not really into this kind of, and our target market probably isn't really into Jay-Z's music, this is a guy that can talk with Warren Buffett or Bono. They call him the Frank Sinatra of rap, very literate and very businesslike in the way that he does business and the way that he runs his enterprise like a business.
Well, he's got to. I mean, they all should be doing that.
Right. But in a lot of cases, their manager is the one that's kind of reining them in or whatever and stuff. In Jay-Z's case, he's the guy, Mm-hmm. He says if you listen to Jay-Z's music, you can listen to it 10 times and get another meaning out of it because it's so poetic and it's so different. So he thinks on many different levels at the same time. It's kind of the Renaissance thing. Leonardo da Vinci, where he was an artist and a businessman and a designer and an engineer and this and that and the other thing. People tend to specialize nowadays, and get really, really, really good at just one thing. Here there's the other side of that argument of, people who become really, really good at more than one thing and put those together in an interesting way. All right. So Rob Campbell in Shanghai with Wyden and Kennedy. Another one of those terrible names. Maybe it's a cobbler's shoes kind of thing, because these are people who specialize in branding, but they have the least memorable names. He's a kind of the opposite of Reuben Goldston. He's a bald, queen-loving, Birkenstock-wearing bloke from Nottingham that lives in Shanghai, right? Also a very interesting character because he talks about the fact that people don't buy skill in a vacuum. People don't care what you know till they know that you care. It doesn't matter how good somebody is at what they do unless you know that they are completely focused on your problem and can actually solve it for you, right? I also liked the difference between evil and devious. Devious is good, evil is bad, right? So it's really about, sometimes you can think win-win, but you still have to trick people to get their attention. And this happens a lot in marketing. People say, people come to us and say, I need a brochure. And their real problem is not that they need a brochure. They need a different approach to their marketing. But in order to get to the point where we can solve that problem for them,
we have to give them a brochure.
Yeah. We'll say, okay, yeah, let's work on a brochure. But in the process, here's a couple of questions that we have. And we know we're not working on a brochure, right? And they may or may not know that we're not working on a brochure. The eventual product will be something that they are totally happy with, and it may be a brochure. But, they will absolutely get what they want, and we do have our clients' best interests at heart. But there are some times when we disagree with them, and there are some times when our agenda and their agenda is not precisely the same, right? If it was, they wouldn't need us.
Right.
Okay. So you need to give them what they want, but also make sure that you're giving them what they actually need, right, that they may or may not know about. So an example he gives of this is Daniel Radcliffe was in New York for several months while acting in a play, and he found himself pestered by the paparazzi. He did not chew them out. He didn't ask them to leave him alone. He didn't run away. He didn't do any of those things. He just started wearing the same clothes every day to and from the theater. Now, he knew that the paparazzi would be expecting new pictures every day, right? That's what their editors want and everything. And so they can't just send the same pictures of the dude in the same clothes every day, so they stopped following him around and left him alone. So, how can you get what you want while, not being nasty or causing a conflict or, getting into a tiff you don't want to get into, right?
Yep.
I thought that was brilliant. Okay, and here's another one that he talks about is cultivating informants. And the example he gives is he was working with a car radio company that made this beautiful, stylish sound system, right? Rob had seen a show, that featured a kid that steals cars. He thought, we've got a problem because if we advertise this the way the client wants this advertised, this is going to be known for being the most stolen item in cars that was ever invented, right? And that is not what we want to be known for. So he tracked this kid down, that had been in this program, and brought him to a meeting with this client, and actually worked with him as a consultant of, how can we make this attractive to legitimate customers without making this a legitimate pawn shop item or, a highly desired item of theft. And so how do they solve the problem? They bring in somebody who is maybe on the opposite side, or maybe somebody that they don't want to be working with, and figure out how can we use this person to get what we want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he said, as an advertising guy, I could tell them that, but it would not have the same impact as coming from this kid who had boosted hundreds of cars over the last year.
Well, we worked for a financial institution that hired hackers for the same reason.
Exactly. So, and basically getting along with people that may not fit into your definition of useful actually are really useful and helpful and everything else. So, all right. So Phil Adams from Edinburgh, Scotland. I never did learn how to pronounce that right. You've been there. How do you pronounce it?
Edinburgh.
Okay.
Not necessarily and it's Edinburgh.
All right.
Sort of a on the end.
Right, from Digital Blonde, right? That actually is a good name. At least a memorable name. All right, so don't be too timid and squeamish about your actions. All life is an experiment.
Yeah.
This guy is all about fast and weird, right? And does a great job of it. So this is one of those paradoxes, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. So Ireland is known as a very conservative country, right? And people are very buttoned up and conservative in the way they dress.
You said Ireland. This is Scotland.
Oh, Scotland. Okay, I'm sorry. Scotland is probably also known as a very buttoned up conservative country. Is that true?
Well,
thrifty for sure.
It depends on which part of it you're talking about. They can certainly show you that if you go to the castle and you're there the right time of the year and watch a military tattoo, then it's all British and very formal, and the prince steps out and opens things up and they got this whole thing going. That's a great thing. But the people you meet on the streets, not so much.
Okay. All right. Well, one of the things that these guys are famous for is the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, where any number of weird things could be happening at any given time. And I think that's actually kind of a cool thing. We're from Salt Lake City, which is also a very conservative kind of a place, but people really get into Comic-Con here. And I think it's just really neat to see all of the weirdos running around Main Street during Comic-Con. We don't necessarily go to the conference, but often we're downtown doing one thing or another during that, and it's just really fun to people watch when the weirdness erupts, right? It's just so much more interesting, and this is something that aviation could use a whole heck of a lot more of. I keep using the example of CNL Aviation and the events that they have. They do videos leading up to when they present at shows, and they do fun things like the spoof on airplane that they did this year, and Otto the inflatable pilot. You can get your picture taken with Otto. Most of aviation is just way too navy blue and buttoned up, right? But if you can add a little element of weirdness without ruining your credibility, I think that's a fantastic thing. And it's a great way to get attention and stand out from the crowd. Another really cool concept from Phil was the concept of duos, right? Most people that work together really well, and most people that are really talented in anything. You think about Batman and Robin, Kobe and Shaq, Kirk and Spock, Bonnie and Clyde, Lennon and McCartney, Stockton and Malone. Any of those duos would not be half, of what they are if you took them apart. They're more than the sum of their parts because of the way that they work together.
You left out a couple.
You and me.
That's right, Yamano and Williams from way back. I mean, before we got to really know each other.
Yep.
Our client said that he got more. He would put us on a project, and after the first one, he put us both on a project because he got more out of the both of us working together than if we had any other pair had put on it.
Yeah.
And we argued like cats and dogs, but we ultimately got the best for the client.
Exactly. So you get complementary skills. You get the creative and the critic, you get the art director and the copywriter, you get the detail-oriented and the big thinker. You get, however it is that you categorize that. A lot of folks are not half as talented on their own as they are in a pair. And so if you find somebody that you click with really well, or if you've got a pair of employees that click together really well, you want to keep them together. And Phil's idea was that, people don't graduate from college together. So you have to, as a company, you almost have to hire in pairs and look for good compatibility, because people end up working that way more often than not, at least creative folks.
Somebody could have hired our team from business school and got a real deal if they could have afforded us.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We were the #1 best they had seen, they told us, after graduation.
Right. So, in a lot of cases, it's kind of a matter of, people think in terms of hiring individuals. Mm-hmm. And that is not always the way it works. Sometimes you're looking to fill a place on your team, not necessarily the best individual, or you're looking for a pair of individuals. So we try to hire in pairs, at least the freelance folks that we do and things like that. Okay. So Suzanne Powers, Crispin Porter, and Boguski in London. At least this one has an elephant. That one's memorable, right?
So that's the elephant in the room, right?
Exactly. And you'll never influence the world by trying to be like it. I love that quote. That's Suzanne's favorite quote. And the big thing with the elephant, and this actually is a thing that their firm is really well known for, is for acknowledging the elephant in the room. What is the tension or the friction in the sales process? What is it that is causing a customer to hesitate before they part with their money or whatever? And the example they give is the Domino's turnaround, right? Mm-hmm. Domino's Pizza became, their business model was 30 minutes or it's free, right? Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, their pizza was really, really, really terrible, right? It was awful. And, they acknowledge that and they say, you know what? Our pizza really stinks. We're going to change the recipe and we're going to fix this. And it's still going to be 30 minutes or less. Mm-hmm. And in some markets, they actually sacrifice the 30 minutes or less for quality.
That's right.
So, it's just like, okay, we don't care how fast it is if it's inedible when it gets there. So they kept their primary market value, but then they fixed the elephant in the room, which is, that their pizza really was awful. Okay. Kevin May, Sticks of Seattle. They have a formula for attractiveness. I bet you didn't know there was a formula for attractiveness, at least in a product, right?
Actually, I didn't know their formula.
Okay. So if you apply this formula, which is utility, aesthetics, and values, and you apply it to any given product or service, you come up with some really interesting questions. Like the author, Heather, was able to sit in on what they call a salon, which is basically a brainstorming session about how the client was Microsoft in China, basically. How do we make legal software more attractive than pirated software to buyers in China? And this brainstorming exercise that they went through was actually really interesting. They went through things like status. Unfortunately, you can't wear an operating system on your sleeve or carry it around in your pocket. So it's not like a legit iPhone that you can do that with. They talked about support. They talked about ease of use. They talked about ethics. Can we apply Confucianism, which is the ethics in China, as an ethical framework for getting people to shell out money for software. I don't know if they ever came up with a solution, but it was an interesting exercise, the way that they went through this.
It's not just China. It's a lot of those countries outside the U.S. that have this issue.
Mm-hmm. But again, you're looking at that formula of attractiveness. How can you make it more attractive by using either utility or aesthetics or values? It all comes down to one of those three, right? All right. Cool. And I like his definition of success as well. To have built a financially viable business that has totally eliminated any a-holes from our purview, either as clients or colleagues. We've done that. Right now, I really like every single one of our clients. I can say that with a straight face and absolutely mean it. We really like them. And we don't work with anybody we don't like, which is fabulous. That really frees up the creative process a whole heck of a lot, right? All right. Okay. Sahar Sidham, and I have no idea whether I'm saying that right. AMVBBDO and the Forge Factory. Well, actually, the Forge Factory is part of AMVBBDO, another one of those terrible names in London. And this is your favorite quote from the book, right?
Yeah, well, one of them, yeah, but it's absolutely a fact. The future belongs to the few of us still willing to get our hands dirty.
Right.
Because you see people every day that either say, well, I'm not technical, or I don't want to do that. And I mean, I ask people all the time, they say, well, I'd like to do A, B, C, or D. I said, really? And what are you willing to do to obtain that? And if the answer isn't whatever it takes, I just ignore them and go on, because that's what you have to have. If you're not willing to do what it takes, you're not going to get there, wherever there is.
Right. We had a conversation with a former client, just recently, and, asked him, what is your favorite sales or marketing activity? And he said, writing a check to you guys. He really wanted to wash his hands of the whole scenario, and we ended up going separate ways. He's a great guy and we like him a lot, but it was not going to work because he wasn't willing to get his hands dirty, Right. So it's definitely a cool quote, and I really like that. This is something he referred to in their conversation was the Gartner hype cycle. Did you see this? This is something that I had heard of, but I'd never seen it. So, I went and looked it up to see a picture of it. I'm a visual person. I don't care if somebody describes something to me all day long. It means a lot more to me if I can see it. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, I have to apologize. But basically, it's a big, long upslope with a technology trigger. And then it comes to a peak of inflated expectations. And then it drops off into a trough of disillusionment, and then a slope of enlightenment, and then a plateau of productivity. So you think about like smartphones, they were going to save the world, and then they were the bane of everybody's existence. And then they became kind of necessary, and everybody understood that, it was a good thing, but it wasn't going to solve all our problems. And now they're in a plateau of productivity, right? And this is their latest Gartner hype cycle. And you can see where they have different things on it. Virtual reality right now is in their plateau of productivity. It's starting to actually have some useful uses in training and other kinds of things. So it kind of went through the whole epileptic synapse or epileptic phase of craziness and unrealism, and came back to where it's actually being useful. So this is the hype cycle for emerging technologies in 2017. You can think of this, there's a similar curve in the marketing life cycle or the product life cycle. Any new product that you're introducing to the market, you have to understand where it is on the product life cycle. Are you fighting disbelief? Are you fighting disillusionment? Has it become boring? Wherever it sits on this curve is a thing that you need to think about when you're talking about sales and marketing, right?
And how to move it forward on the curve. Exactly.
That's absolutely true. So you have to talk some people down from unrealistic expectations and talk people up from disillusionment. We've got an article on Twitter that goes through a conversation I had with somebody at a trade show about Twitter is stupid.
Actually, no.
Yeah, okay, yes, Twitter is stupid in the way that a lot of people use it. And no, nobody wants to know what you had for breakfast. And, all of that stuff. And we kind of went through this whole curve while we were standing there, and I was showing him some things that you can do with Twitter, right? So any new technology goes through that phase, and knowing what you're fighting is really helpful. All right, Brian Miller, Sense Worldwide, London, right? Sense Worldwide is known as the Hogwarts of Strategy. I love that. This is where wizards go to become better wizards, and that's what they want to be known for. I like that. One thing that they did in the book with Heather and Brian is they went to a conference, the Playful Conference, which is, the world of games, and talked about game theory and what is fun to people, and how can you make whatever it is that you sell more fun, right? And how can you use game theory to influence their behavior? In fact, we just talked about this with a client that sells software. How can we solve some of the issues in the aviation industry by making it more fun, or by resolving some of these really, really dull, dry, horrible things that people have to do, right?
Yep.
And more about that later. We'll probably include a link to that when we publish an article about that. All right. Also, Strategists Wanted. He talks about how everybody has become kind of reflexive to the market, and being a strategist is something that is very unusual nowadays, but definitely needed. Not everything can be done by AI, right?
Somebody just needs to sit back, relax, and think.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So, I went into this thinking that Heather LeFevre, the person that wrote the book, was kind of a lightweight, and was doing this exercise to kind of build her own credibility and everything else. Came out of it understanding that, she actually had the ability to participate really well in a lot of these conversations. And, she also is a really good marketer in her own right. One of the things that she did was the Whopper Virgin campaign. Watch this person take their first bite of a Whopper. That had really, really good results. And also she's worked for Emirates Airlines. So that's with Strawberry Frog. That's one of the connections to the aviation world. So respect her a whole lot more than I did when I started reading the book, thinking, it was a pink brain on the cover. Can't possibly take this seriously, right?
Well, I don't know. I was not impressed with the cover of the book, other than the way it feels.
Okay, yeah, it is made out of really neat material. And, the people that do materials for iPhones, they make metal feel good. The person that made this book made the cover feel good. And I don't know if it's some kind of cardboard or whatever.
I don't know. It almost feels like a combination of leather and vinyl or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost kind of a suede-y, cardboard.
But it's not.
Exactly. So interesting materials on that, and probably part of the appeal of it. But anyway, so conclusion from the book, what do you think?
I don't know that there were any real revelations to me.
Okay.
There was some reiteration of things that I had experienced and that I've espoused in some cases, and just reiterated some things.
Cool. I thought it was kind of inspiring. It was definitely not a concrete or a how-to or anything like that, but it was definitely more inspiring than I was expecting it to be. So looking forward next month to something that is much more concrete and informational and probably useful, and that is Everybody Writes by Anne Handley. I have read this before, and it is definitely worth a read. So there's no ambiguity here. I'm actually looking forward to this one with some enthusiasm. What do you think?
Well, good for you.
All right. But of course, I'm a writing nerd. So, and I think everybody could benefit from being able to express themselves better and think more clearly. And, that really comes across in writing, right?
And reading.
So thank you for joining us for our book club discussion, and go forth and sell more stuff.
Actually, it is go sell more stuff. America Needs the Business by Zig Ziglar.
Oh, go buy more stuff. Go buy more books. But go sell more stuff because America does need the business, and we are the people that move the economy, right?
Yeah, nothing happens till somebody sells something.
Absolutely. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for joining us for Aviation Marketing Hangar Flying, the best place to learn what really works in sales and marketing in the aviation industry. Remember to subscribe on iTunes and leave a rating.